Good afternoon, everyone. Cognizant that I've been primed about many comments about the three men in the room today. I apologize for not sharing the morning with you. I've been traveling a lot, so I was enjoying a morning with my partner at home. But hopefully, being 6'8", it's 1.25 men in the room. So. We didn't change the title. If anyone wants to hear about the man box, I apologize. That's not what we will be talking about today. But I think that with Maureen's patriarchy tree, you're well primed in that space. But in my conversations with Lois, we were talking about really speaking up and challenging those situations and scenarios that come up in life. And I believe the speaker just before me was named Julia, right? Yeah. And we were talking. What really resonated with me was that that shame of not speaking up, those missed opportunities. So, does anyone carry around shame from a time that they didn't do something? Yeah. Is there a brave volunteer to share the story with us? If not, I have one in my pocket too. But. Do we have a roaming mic potentially? Yeah? Okay. Cool. I can hop off stage.
Thank you. In the 1970s and 80s, I was employed by the City of Ottawa, and I was put in a very difficult situation of possible abuse. I managed to get out of it. Everybody laughed about it, all my male colleagues, and said, "Oh, not important, don't worry about it." Because it was not addressed, my work suffered, and I was pushed out long before retirement. And they said, "Oh, well, if you make a fuss, if you stir it up, it'll follow you, and you won't be able to do anything interesting after this." And that was 1988. And this is decades later, and I've been able to do all kinds of interesting things. Not paid, but volunteer commitment.
Thank you for sharing. So for the record, 88 was the year that I was born. So that's a long time to carry that weight, right? So if you think about how long we spend with those missed opportunities, and then think about a time in your life where you do recall that you did the right thing and how little space and time that takes up in your mind. With a poke and a prod, I think that you could remember it, but it's those missed opportunities that really we reflect back on. And if I think about, I'm also just thinking about what's most useful for you all today. You're here for uplifting women and girls and commenting about why there are no men in the room. My background is in engaging men and boys. I started an organization called Next Gen Men, late 2014, early 2015. And the roots of that were that one of my best friends, who's my co-founder, unfortunately his 13-year-old brother died by suicide in 2007. He was a young black man. We think that it was homophobic bullying, but he hadn't come out. So that was an experience that we as friends went through together, and as a male friendship, going through something vulnerable and emotional, and that really deepened our relationship. Then in 2010, I was a Canadian all-academic varsity athlete. Life was pretty good in terms of, power and privilege afforded by status and those kinds of things, but I was struggling with my mental health and with depression and all those kinds of things. And I was lucky enough at the time to be dating a pretty strong feminist. She's a midwife now, so, crunchy granola type. But really helped me reframe kind of my identity around what it means to be a man. And a lot of my struggles were in and around, you got to be tough, you can't show emotion, you can't ask for help. A lot of those stereotypes, right? And I think that over the last, 100 plus years under the banner of feminism, we've had a really tremendous conversation around women's identities and roles in society, and we continue to do so as witnessed by this room. But we've been missing a parallel conversation for, with, and about men. And that's really what the work that Next Gen Men is trying to do. And what really resonated with me from the speaker before as well is that cost, the cost of saying something, of speaking up, of standing out. And for those of us with the privilege of being men in patriarchy, the cost is large, right? Like we have those benefits, and the cost when you are the one facing oppression, well, sometimes you don't have anything to lose, and you stand up and you speak out. And I'm not making an excuse for why men and boys shouldn't, but just offering a little more insight as well too, because it's been a huge part of my learning and unlearning, and being in male-dominated spaces, being in boardrooms, being in workshops, being in locker rooms, and having those types of conversations. But there is hope as well too, because a lot of the research is showing that if there's a group of 7 and someone says something that really just gets your gut like, that was not right, 4 out of the 7 actually believe that was not right. But nobody speaks up because they think they're the 1 out of the 7, right? So equipping people with the skills and the tools to speak up in those moments is a big part of our work as well too, because we know that once you flip it and it becomes the majority, the minority quiets down, right? So that's kind of where we're coming from with this as well too. I'm going to give you a framework. We're going to work through some scenarios, but then also acknowledging, we've been leading a lot of this work across Canada, and the comments around there's not enough men in the room. I can share with you right now, I'm working on a project with the federal government. You may see me wince because my back's been a bit messed up, but I've been traveling a lot, and since the start of the year, I've been to Edmonton, Calgary, Victoria, Vancouver, Toronto twice, Ottawa, Montreal, and somewhere else, and I still have Winnipeg and Halifax to go before the end of the quarter. But what we're doing through that project is hosting community dialogues to potentially seed a national network to support and align pro-feminist men doing violence prevention and gender equity work, because that body doesn't exist. Thank you. But we got a lot of work to do, because this was based on research that my colleague Lana Wells at the University of Calgary conducted. But through this research, she wanted to find patterns of the experiences of the few men that are doing this work. And I think 550 or some emails were sent out to feminists and feminist organizations and asking for men doing this work in public and observable ways. And Canada's 38 million people, something like that. So 550 emails went out, 121 names were put forward. So that's not a lot, right? And it's not to say that there's not other men who don't identify as feminists and see themselves doing this kind of work. But, we have a lot of work to do to create a new narrative to capture those men and boys who want to be involved in this work, right? Because feminist, especially among men, has been a bit of a dirty word, right? So just a little more context about the work. But in terms of the framework today, everyone knows, we talked about those failures to speak up. We know what it means to be a bystander. So I'm just going to quickly define that. A bystander or witness is anyone who sees what's happening is wrong. Bystanders may or may not know what to do or may expect others to do something to help. And I think that we've all heard of that story in New York. I can't remember the woman's name, but it was a really unfortunate story where she was being assaulted in the street and was crying for help for an extended period of time. And then nobody called the police because everyone else thought someone else would call the police. Right? Does anyone know the name of that story? Kitty, I think. Kitty Genovese, right? Yes, great memory. So what we talk about a lot, there's a lot of talk about bystander intervention. It's a big framework. But when we're talking about creating a new narrative and those kinds of things, we also sometimes get a little bogged down in activist and academic language and whatnot. So we've reframed that and called it being an upstander, right? So what is an upstander? An upstander is any person who knows what's happening is wrong and does something that makes it right, right? Not fully right, but at least moves towards that action. So we know what a bystander is, and we want to work towards people becoming upstanders. So, and then in the previous talk, there was a little talk about allyship as well too. And I do think that being an upstander is a bit different than allyship. One is acute, right? Like in a moment, something is happening. That's when you want to be an upstander because there's an opportunity to do something. Whereas allyship is active, right? Oftentimes being an ally is a verb. You know, I'm an ally. Great, you sat on a panel. Amazing, right? But it's that active supporting and promoting and those kinds of things. So we got to start thinking about allyship as an active word as well too. So what's preventing us from being upstanders? That question, you know, in that situation of it's not my problem, someone else can solve it, right? Potentially in certain situations, especially in the cultural mosaic that we have here in Canada, we might see a situation and say, oh, it must be a cultural thing, right? And kind of pass the buck through that. You know, we might be witnessing verbal harassment or something like that, and not anything, you know, violent or causing like physical harm. So we say, oh, it's harmless, right? In the end, nothing will happen. We might look around and something's happening and nobody else is doing anything. So we think, well, I guess if nobody else is doing anything, I shouldn't do anything, right? And then another thought, just for us to kind of marinate on those situations, I can't make a difference, right? Does anyone have other reasons that I may not have listed? Oh, sorry, I thought. No? Cool. That's fear of backlash. Great. Yeah, no, that's accurate as well too. Yeah. Great. So now that we know that there's situations where we feel shame and regret and that those happen in our lives, and some of the reasons why we may not do something, we're going to dive into a framework, and there should be printouts on everyone's table so that you have it with you as well too. We call it the 5 Ds. We borrowed it from an organization called Hollaback, which is about sexual harassment on the street. And I think the tough part that I hope to overcome with this exercise is oftentimes when there's a situation, we view it as binary. You either do something or you don't do something, right? There's only 2 choices there. So hopefully by giving you a framework with 5 choices, it becomes 5 choices to do something and 1 choice not to do something, right? So a little more tools in the toolbox. So the first D is direct, right? Aim to de-escalate the situation, not engage the perpetrator in debate or argument. So, 8 years ago, had someone told me that I would be standing in front of a room like this having a conversation about these things, I probably would have laughed you out of the room, but somehow, some way, I found my way here. And when I look back, I think of all the different experiences that helped me understand gender more broadly. Contextually, my degree is in international commerce and global development. I worked with the Canadian International Development Agency, CIDA, in Brazil with a women's cooperative around economic security. So that was one experience. Obviously, I mentioned my partner in university. But another thing that was very formative for me, being a large man athlete, I worked as a doorman on and off for 10 years. So you see a lot of crap and bullshit. So that frames a lot of stuff. But when you're 6'8", 260 pounds, direct is a pretty good option for you, right? So, if you feel like I am, then you can go do that. But it may not be the option. So going up to someone saying, leave them alone, there's no need to use language like that, and that's not okay, that's inappropriate, that's disrespectful, right? And so one of the big fears is backlash in those situations when it's almost like a direct confrontation. So that's one D you could use. The second one is distract. So aim to interrupt the incident without directly engaging the perpetrator or necessarily addressing what's happening. A while back, Islamophobia is not an unfortunately new thing, but there was a rash of Islamophobia in the States, and it was circulating on the internet. There was this diagram, and it was on public transit in one city. I can't remember what it was, but it was all about how to be an ally when someone is experiencing Islamophobia. Does anyone remember that maybe? But the major thing was it was a woman in hijab being berated by a man. And they were encouraging the person to just walk right up into the situation and engage with the woman facing the harassment, right? Ignore the perpetrator, have a conversation, act like it's not there. And that's a distraction, right? So that's another tool. You can engage with the person affected. You can get in the way. Normally, if I had a projector, I show this really hilarious video of a man who was accused of sexual harassment on the subway in New York. And I use the video because there's a bunch of people doing upstander intervention and we're naming the different things. But there's this large white man who just literally, he's eating like a bag of chips and just like goes and stands in the middle, right? Like does nothing else. And so another option there. So asking, who wants coffee? If you have coffee, cause a commotion, spill the coffee, right? So we have direct and we have distract. So another one is delegate, right? So this one would come up, nobody else is doing anything. That's the barrier to me doing something. So looking around and even, maybe you're uncertain, maybe you're like, oh, maybe it's a cultural thing or it's harmless or whatever. But even just kind of like elbowing someone beside you and being like, hey, are you seeing this? Are we seeing this the same way? Is this thing happening? And then getting creative, we're talking about the Kitty Genovese, nobody called police, like, I'm going to go check on the situation. You call 911, right? Like, so empowering others to be upstanders as well, too, right? So now we have direct, distract, and delegate. Another great example around delegation, sorry, it just popped in my head. Going back to that kind of cost of men in those spaces not saying things, I'm remembering a story just came out after Me Too, where a woman had experienced something at the boardroom table, and then after the fact, the man came up to the woman and said, "I'm sorry, so sorry that happened to you," and all she could say was, "Why the hell didn't you say something?" Right? So it's never really great in that sense to go to the person afflicted, but after the fact, if you can't do anything in that moment, like go up to another peer and say, "Hey, next time, did we experience the same thing? We agree that this is not right. Next time I'm going to say something and you have my back," right? And so that kind of starts building that momentum. So that's another tool in our pocket. The next one is delay, right? So just want to quickly share a story, the one that I had in my pocket of a time that I didn't do something. So my best friend, co-founder, I'd mentioned him and his family before, is a black man. I played basketball, predominantly black sport in the Toronto area where I played. So I have a lot of experiences around racial equity and those kinds of things. And I'm sitting on a panel in Calgary, and the person next to me, a white Anglophone, talks about his experience in Montreal and being white N-words just because they were Anglophones in Montreal. But he actually said the word on the panel, and there was a black man on the panel as well. And the MC didn't do anything, and he just asked me a question, and I totally froze and just kind of like started talking, right? And so that was a huge failure. I called my friend after. I was like, "Oh man, this happened. I can't believe I didn't do anything." He talked me through it, held me accountable, talked about those kinds of things. But I delayed. I eventually invited that individual out for coffee and had a conversation with them about how inappropriate it was and how I disagreed with that, right? And so in the moment, I failed. I was a bystander. I was not an upstander. But there's always the action to delay as well, too. And so another opportunity, if we're thinking about, the backlash and the risk to ourselves when we do something like that, unfortunately, if we don't feel safe, sometimes we have to grin and bear the situation. But then if there's an opportunity after to go to the person afflicted and say, "Are you okay? Can I get you help? Should I call someone?" Those kinds of things, right? So thinking of that delay. So we have direct, distract, delegate, delay. Sharing resources. And then the last one that we have here is document, right? And so what's really brilliant about that subway video that I was talking about, there was someone who was directly yelling at the person, there was someone who was distracting and standing in front, but there was also someone who was documenting. Now we all have HD smartphone video in our pocket, right? And so if there's an incident, and these types of things have different seriousness, like we can talk about an assault and those kinds of things, but like even in a workplace, if someone's making inappropriate remarks, if you have a notepad in front of you, write down the day, write down the meeting, what the subject was, write down who said what, right? And that one claim might not be enough for HR, but if you know that this is a pattern and you start documenting it, and then you submit all this paperwork to HR, there's a pattern of behavior here and someone has documented it, right? And it shows that you're conscientiously thinking about that. So that's also documenting as well. So just keep in mind, document responsibly. We also don't want, someone being assaulted and something happening and you not calling 911 while you're busy documenting, right? So true. And recording the details of when and where. And then always also asking the person affected, right? So, if you experience a domestic or witness a domestic violence incident or something like that, the person might be at tremendous risk if there was a report made, and so just being in negotiation with them as well. I don't know. I don't pretend to know what the right answer in that situation is, reporting or not reporting, but I just want to note that we should be responsible with those things as well, and not make people more at risk. So we have direct, distract, delegate, delay, and document. Any quick thoughts or questions about those? Awesome. Cool. So, Lois, did we get the scenarios printed as well, too? Okay, cool. So each table should have 3 scenarios. And amongst yourselves, if each table could choose one of the 3 scenarios and use the 5 Ds framework, maybe even start talking about, okay, I would have done this, but then have the framework to apply to it, right? And then so you'll have a little bit of conversation amongst yourselves. I'm going to float around and see how everything's going. And then we're going to regroup and see how we used our 5 Ds on those scenarios. Sound good? All right, let's do it. Which table chose home? Oh, all right. I see you like, we did. Yeah. So what Ds did we apply to the home situation? And maybe a quick high-level overview for folks who may not have read the situation.
We shared our stories about our experiences.
Okay.
Can you stand up to the mic? Go to the mic. Diane, I'm with Soroptimist, North Vancouver. Yeah, put that in there, see if that works. So we shared our experiences, our home life, what we experienced with our parents, how we saw them, were they demonstrating or modeling, being bystanders, upstanders, and how did that affect us, and how does that affect us with our kids? Of course, we have a lot of single moms here around the table, so we don't all have partners active right now in our lives. So we went back to what we saw and how that affected us.
Right. Okay. And any of the specific kind of like Ds in terms of like dealing with situations?
More teaching our sons, because a lot of us have boys.
Okay.
So teaching them the difference and how they can be in the world. And
Great.
a lot of them are resenting us now for teaching them a bunch of stuff, but they're going to thank us later.
Absolutely. That's childhood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. I think a lot of tables chose workplace, right? Workplace? Oh, just two, 3? Okay. Does someone want to volunteer what came out of their discussion with workplace?
My name's Bella Montgomery, and I'm a visitor today and hopeful Soroptimist Victoria member. So our amazing ladies' table chose workplace, and I think one of the major things that we came up with, well, first of all, we thought we were the victim, and that made the dialogue really different. And then we realized, oh, hang on, we're a bystander or upstander. So then we changed the conversation. And I think the biggest thing that we came up with was that if the safety isn't there for you as an upstander, then you need to use delegation. And as women, we're awesome at delegating, right? You take out the garbage, you fix the beds, okay? So we're great at delegating, and one of the things that we said was that we would ask a male champion in the workplace to address the situation. And then we thought, well, why does it have to be a male to address the situation? And so again, we just thought of that. If there's a man who feels that he is going to be recognized for harassment or something, it might be intimidating for him to be confronted by a woman who he's already feeling oppressed by, if you will. So we just thought that to take both pressures off, that we could delegate it to another male and have the situation resolved that way.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. How about community? Does anyone from that table want to share with us?
Hi everyone, my name is Kimberly, and I recently became a member of Soroptimist Edmonton just last September.
Awesome.
So my group decided to look at the community, and well, based on the examples that were given while we had our discussion, one major concern that came up was fear, and the differences in how women and men perceive different situations. So for this example, I thought that delegation would have been an appropriate response. For one, different situations require different methods of being addressed, right? So maybe a direct approach would not be appropriate because of what could possibly happen, you know, in terms of that person putting themselves at risk, or yeah. So delegating would be good, having a combined voice and not just one or one action that might cause a negative reaction. So that was what I thought about based on the discussion that we had within our group.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I was just thinking, I was talking about the community one with this table here. I think document would also be a really good one. My partner works for the City of Vancouver Parks Department, and she is adamant about like the 311 app and just like hammering home reports and stuff like that. And so if you live in a community and, you know, there's lights that are out and, you know, there's certain things that are unsafe, you know, sending those reports be that squeaky wheel that gets the grease as well too. Oh, I love the peer pressure in this room. I don't have to do anything.
Yeah, we picked community as well, and we picked delegate.
Okay.
But we took a little bit different approach to the whole thing. If this is happening in the park, in the neighborhood, we thought the best way to do it, and the police are telling us, well, just get somebody else to run with you. We decided, no, that's not, that's like blaming the victim, right? You're going to stop this because if you didn't go by yourself, you wouldn't have got assaulted, right? So what we said was, we're going to get the community involved. We're going to go directly to the police and say, hey, this isn't good enough. You know, we want some other action on your part to do that. The better solution would be bringing the community into it, focus media. Maybe somebody could write a letter to the editor. Maybe we could get a security camera put in by the city. Just kick up a little fuss and make it known in the community, our neighbors and everyone, that this is not an appropriate thing for the police to say to us and that we want more action.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that add-on as well too, because what I think is really important with this 5Ds framework, you know, we've moved from the binary of no action or some action to having a skill set, but we can be creative within those 5Ds as well too. It's not meant to be prescriptive. It's just different ways, different lenses to think through. So hopefully that's useful to you. The other thing that I wanted to quickly touch on, especially when it relates to kind of men and boys in and around this, is calling in versus calling out. And I think in this culture, in this day and age, especially social media, cancel culture, and those kinds of things, a lot of people get called out. And I would like us to think about how we can be better at calling people in. If we think about the tree of patriarchy or what I'm imagining when I think of that, there are social and cultural reasons why young men and boys end up the way that they are and the worldviews that they have and those kinds of things. Again, not making excuses, but hopefully if we have an understanding of that, there's a bit of empathy, and with a call-in mentality, it can be an invitation to dialogue, an invitation to curiosity. A lot of people get really defensive and shut down. There's actually like a limbic response, right? Like we as humans, when we were ostracized from our groups, that meant death back in the day. And nowadays that's not the reality, but we still have that wiring. And so if we can have conversations with individuals, that thing you did or said was sexist or might have been sexist versus you are a sexist, right? So differentiating that identity between the action allows opportunities not to centralize that identity. So I just wanted to bring that up in this conversation as well, if we're going to be leveraging those Ds in that way. And then I do have 7 minutes, according to my time here. But I also just wanted to, I'm here, a little bit about the work that I do. Lots of conversation about how do we engage more men and boys. So if anyone has any questions, happy to field those as well for a few minutes before the next window. Yeah. I guess I would just encourage you to use the mic if you have a question.
My question is that since we're a group of women, we invited a couple of guys. I think we could do better, right? But in your group with the men, can you invite some women in?
Yeah, so there's different ways that we do our work. When we do our youth programs, we use gender segregated youth programs, because I always joke if Bobby likes Susie and Susie's in the room, he's going to act totally differently, right? Especially at that age, right? So we have those segregated spaces, and the youth programs are really transformative. I mean, just think about how women see each other and, oh, do you have a new hairdo? I really love that color on you, those kinds of things. Like, we as men have no dialogue like that, right? And so one thing that we do in our program is we have snacks, and from early on in the program, we teach them to get the snack, you have to pay someone else a compliment. And in the beginning, it's very much like, I like your shoes, right? But over the period of time we do this program, it's like, in the class when this happened, I really appreciated how you had my back, right? And it's just building that capacity for that dialogue, that vulnerability, those kinds of things. And that may not be possible in other spaces. Now, that's our youth program. We do have community discussion groups that are active in Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Medicine Hat, Toronto, and we're launching in Lethbridge and St. John's later this year. I actually thought those were going to be men's groups to start with, but I'm always aware of being painted as a men's rights activist, which we are not. So at the launch party, I invited people of all genders, and we actually had a transgender speaker talking about body image. And I found that the women in those spaces with adults and some libations and those kinds of things actually elicited more vulnerability from the men than they may have offered on their own. And so we've kept those community discussions open to people of all genders. It's still predominantly men, I'd say 2/3. And everyone comes with the understanding that we are coming to speak about gender and masculinity and men's experiences and what it means to be a man today. Obviously through a pro-feminist lens, we make sure the space is anchored and structured. But there's progress there, because when we're having those community discussions, gender is a community issue. We all construct it, right? Like, you as women construct young men's identities of what it means to be a man and how to react and relate in the world, right? So it's really important, because as well, us men having a solo conversation, we might come to a conclusion, but if there's nobody to vet us and say, oh, well, that actually impacts me this way, then we still have a blind spot, right? So that's valuable, having those mixed gender things. And then we do a lot of stuff in workplaces. I'm not sure if you know this, but nonprofit's a really shitty business model. So we started a social enterprise to engage men in male-dominated industries in conversations around gender equity. And in those spaces, sometimes it's mixed gender, but sometimes it's segregated as well. For example, last week, 2 weeks, I don't know, time flies. I was with a room full of 50 male police officers from across Ontario, and we had a conversation around gender norms, power and privilege, those kinds of things. And I do an exercise with sticky notes at the beginning, talking about what are some of your anxieties, what are some of your fears, and a lot of it is, why are we being separated? Are we bad? Is this a slap on the wrist? Those kinds of things. And we had a really rich discussion, and then at the end I asked them, would we have had this discussion if there was women in the room, right? Because sometimes when we're as men trying to create those safe spaces, we also hold back those dumb questions that we have that might hurt someone, right? So creating those spaces can have value as well too, especially when they're held and anchored in a certain way. So within the 3 settings, that's a bit of diversity as well. Yeah.
Okay, my name's Lois Taylor. I'm a Soroptimist. We are in a situation here which is self-evident that we're preaching to the converted, and that often happens with Soroptimist gatherings and forums of this nature. I'm just wondering if that happens with the group of pro-feminist men that you are talking about. Do you have difficulties reaching men who may be resistant to this notion? And if so, what do you do about that? And do you have any words of wisdom for us about what to do about that?
For sure, I appreciate that question. First of all, I think it is still important to have kind of women's spaces, girl spaces to talk about and share lived experiences. There's value in that for sure. But it's tough. I mean, like the number one way that we get hired into organizations is when they have a women's ERG and they're like, we're so tired of having the same conversation amongst ourselves. How do we get our male colleagues in here? How do we actually change things? So it's a great question. When we're thinking about preaching to the converted, like we struggle with it as well too. Like when being a feminist and championing gender equality as a man isn't necessarily like cool yet. However, the social zeitgeist is shifting. I think about, I joke about when we started this work that we started it before it was cool, and then the Me Too movement happened, and then every other week there's a New York Times article, Harper's Bazaar or something. Someone's writing around masculinity. It's still very like masculinity 101 kind of gender norms, and not necessarily diving quite deep into reconstructing those kinds of things. And there are also, men's groups and those kinds of things, especially, sorry, Vancouverites, but I just moved here a year ago. Vancouver's a very fluffy city. There's a lot of like coaches and gurus and, self-development and all that stuff here. There's a lot of men's work happening from that, but there's a lack of social justice and personal accountability in and around that work as well too. And if I think about the 3 levels of change, individual, organizational, community, or systemic, very men stop short of the systemic because the status quo benefits us. And I think as we do this work, we talk about the social cost of doing the work as well too. And I think that truthfully, we as men especially overvalue what it is we might lose, invites to beers with the boys and saying whatever the hell we want. And we undervalue what it is we might gain, our mental health, better relationships with people, engagement with our children, those kinds of things. So if we as a collective can start really reframing that conversation, because no offense or disrespect, but like best for women or those kinds of things, like we all have a fundamental human question of what's in it for me. And to date, the gender equity conversation has been about women and girls and just for women and girls, and men don't see themselves as gendered individuals and being able to deconstruct and reconstruct their idea of what it means to be a man.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Major, and I'm actually a visitor here today, so I'm really appreciating all the comments and questions and guest speakers. So I do have the privilege in my work life to work in a high school in Langley, and so one of the conversations that we've constantly been starting to have, especially as a staff, is this type of thing, and how do we have these conversations with boys? And I actually attended a conference recently called The Boy Crisis. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the presenter. Oh gosh, I cut off his name. Farrell. He's doing his PhD.
Warren Farrell. Okay.
It was amazing information. But my question to you is, in your opinion, is it ever too early to start having these conversations with boys as parents or as educators? And if there's one key strategy that you can perhaps share that would be a really good kickstart to getting the conversation happening?
Yeah, for sure. That's unfortunately the question I can have. I will answer it. So I apologize to the lady behind, but
Make one statement?
yeah, for sure.
I just want to say that rather than have this room filled with men, I'd prefer all of you to become experts and then get yourself invited to arenas where there are men. I mean, I've spoken to Rotary clubs and whatnot where there's men present, and bring the message. The whole idea is to gain the knowledge so that we can deliver it to people.
Yeah.
So it's not a loss to learn, it's us now going out and reproducing it. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you. Just to quickly answer that question, first of all, with a caveat, Warren Farrell, just in terms of his background and stuff like that, a bit of a jaded feminist. He used to be well known in the feminist sphere, has gone a bit more kind of men's rights activist around that. So just also knowing kind of where your information, those kinds of things are coming from. And the other thing that I want to say around like men's rights activism is like, we actually agree on a lot of the issues. Like men are 3 out of 4 suicides. Men die on average 5 years earlier than women. Men are the primary perpetrators of violence against women, girls, other men and themselves. Addiction, incarceration, homelessness, those are all men's gender-based issues. We don't wish equity within those issues, but we need to look at them through a gender-based lens, right? The difference is between like a pro-feminist lens and an anti-feminist lens is the solutions, right, that we're proposing are wildly different. So I will say that I agree with a lot of what Warren Farrell brings up, but I don't necessarily agree with a lot of the methodology of how to engage. That being said, it's never too early to engage. I mean, as parents, we are the number one people who are constructing what being a man and being a woman is for our children. And, women obviously are, I think, a lot more conscientious and thoughtful about that. Things are changing. Research is showing that fathers are 3 times more engaged this generation than their fathers were. But like, it's still very difficult when, your little boy comes up and is wearing a pink t-shirt and says, I really want to go to school in this. A lot of people wince and say, I want to champion you to do that. However, I also want to protect you and make sure that your feelings aren't hurt, right? And so there's that tension that we're all still navigating in and around that. I think women and mothers take on a lot more of that role, and I think fathers could do more with it. I mean, especially fathers of boys, we know that tired trope fathers of daughters, we know that tired trope of, if I have a daughter, I'm going to start polishing my shotgun for when the boyfriend comes. It's because we all inherently know how shitty men can be. But most of us are trying to protect our daughters rather than changing how men are, right? And so that's the way that we got to encourage this kind of dialogue, not go back to how things used to be, right? So that's a lot of what I'm thinking about and taking away. I think I'm a bit over time. Thank you all for the audience today, and keep up the great work.
So I got asked to come and wrap up the day, to take you through an exercise around, so what? What do I do now? And we all have this amazing sphere of influence in our lives. Out of this exercise, Sharon might go and start a global movement. Amy might totally rebrand the work that she does. Some people might say, I'm going to do something just for myself. What I'm going to take you through is about thinking through what could give you hope. And I have a message for your 15-year-old. We are not dead yet. I think she is absolutely right that us boomers didn't take us where we had all dreamed we would go. I saw 65 come and go a little while ago, and you realize when you're on the other side of 65, I call it my radical third. I call it my radical third for 3 reasons. 1, I'm recognizing I am not going to get out of it alive. 2nd, what are they going to do to me that they haven't already done to me? And 3rd, I am old. And being old can be really cool sometimes. Sometimes you get to be direct when some young girl who's 25 can't be. And there is incredible power in that. So I'm a radical feminist, I'm a poet, I'm an author, I'm a consultant, I'm old, I've done a shitload of stuff. And so I want you to leave here today with both celebrating what you already do and thinking about 1 or 2 things you might do. And so the first thing I want to do is I want you to invite 3 generations silently into the room. I'm going to do mine out loud, and then I'll give you a minute to do yours. I was thinking about the 5 generations yet to come. And it got me thinking about my mother, the MacArthur in my name. She couldn't teach once she got married because the school board she taught in thought that might be an immoral influence. Like no one had sex out of wedlock. She believed in education, and so I got one. I got to go to university when most women in my town wouldn't even conceive of being able to do that. And I spent my time in university being a radical feminist, and all my years in education, I have undertaken a simple tenet. Women will not be discriminated against on my watch. And I have, and you know, as a lesbian feminist, there's more than a few people in the world who thought I shouldn't exist. I've had some experiences, but I don't have time to tell you any of those. But perhaps the proudest moment of my life is I had the incredible opportunity to be president of a college. When I left that college, I received a note from a woman who said, "For the first time in my life, I feel safe." So I want you to leave this room with the hope of influence. So the first generation for me was my mother. The second generation was me. The third generation for me is my stepdaughter, who is a musician and runs her own music management business, and her primary work in the world is to advance gender equity in the music industry. That's what she does in the world. And she's part of Key Change. If you don't know what it is, look it up. It works worldwide around gender equity in music. So, just a moment of silence. Men, women, children, otherly gendered, just bring those people, those generations, silently into the room with us for a minute. So as I said, we're going to spend the last 45 minutes, an hour, building some hope, some action. So I'm Canada's most minor poet, so I'm going to read you a poem. Those people with literature degrees laughed. Those people who didn't laugh, you're going to ask the people with literature degrees what that means. My beautiful friend, Hope. You point me toward the sun. You shelter me in the rain. You trumpet my success and hold me in my sorrow, ever whispering, rise up, rise up. So we're going to begin. You have a piece of paper on your table. Can you fold it in half like a book for me? You should have some markers on your table too. You're going to need a pen and a marker. So, we're not even numbers at all the tables, so some of you will work in pairs of 3. So first thing, find another person or another 2 people at your table to work with, either in a pair or a triad to work with. Point at those people and get them, and then come back and listen to me. Okay. Okay, if you can hear me, take a breath. Okay. So, what you're going to leave with is a little booklet of hope and action. And we're going to start that by you interviewing each other. So, you're going to interview somebody else is going to interview you. And you're going to take notes or draw or do whatever you want on the back of that person's booklet. You all have the same color, so it doesn't matter whether you really exchange or not at the moment. So, you will ask, like if I'm interviewing Amy, these are the questions I'm going to ask. So I'll say the questions a couple times so you can get them. Amy, tell me a story of a time when you felt you really influenced gender equity in your work, your life. One of those moments that made your heart quiver a little bit. It could be the tiniest of things. It could be one of those moments where you stood up, you distracted. Right? First question. Second question, Amy, tell me what you valued about yourself in that moment. Third question. Tell me 3 things you're longing for around gender equity. And then I have all of 5 minutes to do that with Amy. Then Amy has all of 5 minutes to do that with me. So these are pretty fast interviews, right? So Amy then asks me the same questions. So, 3 questions. Tell me a story of a time when you felt proud of what you did in gender equity, something, big or small. What did you value about yourself? What do you long for? What do you wish for? The person doing the interview, listen, take care of that person, ask whatever questions come to mind. You have 5 minutes. Does anybody in the room have a question? Everybody got the questions? Everybody got somebody to work with? Okay, when I tell you to take a breath, come back and listen to me. Go, you have 10 minutes. So what you're doing is telling them the themes from their story. So, Roseanne, you interviewed both Amy and Sharon, or just Sharon? What are some of the things that stood out for you in Sharon's story?
When Sharon was Western Canada Region Governor, she won an award at the Governor's Roundtable, I guess. But she was talking when they announced her name, which doesn't surprise any of us, actually. So she missed her name being announced, and then when she did go out to get her award, she felt like she was walking on air because she was in this world of her own. She was so excited that she'd won. And then won a second award and had to repeat the whole process, but wasn't talking the second time.
That's a theme from the story, the ability to feel that power. So you get 30 seconds each. Tell each other the themes you heard from the story, from the values, from the longings. 30 seconds each. Where you go. This is about using your influence toward gender equity, right? Reaching out and saying, there's a couple of things here I could do. So we're working toward a couple of actions that you're going to take out of this room and actually do. So you have your stories, and you heard somebody else say, this is what I heard in your story. So it kind of excited me in your story. But now I want you to think a little bit about that longing that you have. And think about it into the future. Right? One of the longings I have that is before I die, my stepdaughter will not have to work for gender equity in music. Right? So think about those longings you have. They could be tiny. Right? It could be the next time I see a 15-year-old woman being ignored in the Starbucks lineup, I'm going to muscle in and say, I think it's her turn. It doesn't have to be enormous. Right? So I want you to fast forward into the future a little bit and think about that theme, that story that you told, that thing you're longing to do. And I'm going to give you all of 10 minutes to do 2 things. Pick a horizon. Could be 3 years, 5 years before you die. Could be any kind of horizon. Right? Doesn't matter. On the front of your booklet, I want you to draw what it's going to look like when it's achieved. And, stick figures are good. It's okay. You don't have to be an artist to do this. But draw what it's going to look like when it's achieved, this thing that you're working toward. On the inside front cover of your booklet, right, I want you to write what's called a provocative proposition. Now, a provocative proposition is written in the present tense. It's a full sentence, and it's bold, and it's active, and it's powerful. My provocative proposition is that my daughter will come to me and say, we've achieved gender equity in music, and that women are no longer used as fodder in the music industry for sex, rape, and violence. So that's a big provocative proposition. Your provocative proposition could be, when I stand in the Starbucks line, I see everybody being treated the same, being treated with equity. Not the same, but with equity. One of the most wonderful definitions of equity I've ever come across is equity is not being invited to the party. It's being asked to dance. And when you do dance, you don't have to apologize for having done so. Because this is the place that women are, right? We're being invited somewhat, not equally and not equitably, into boardrooms and CEOs' offices and so on. But damn it, we better behave when we get there. Right? The number of times as a CEO I was told, just kind of ever so subtly, that maybe I could dress differently. It's just like, people, you hired me for a goddamn brain, not the way I dress. And so, image on the front, your bold idea inside, right? And like for Sharon, her bold idea is that equity is not a conversation in a sidebar room at the UN. It is the only conversation that happens on the floor day after day after day, right? So big, small, doesn't matter. Way you go. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to do both. And so I've already recruited the woman who has the muscle on the front of hers to say hers. And if anybody else wanted to just say theirs to the whole room, they can just come to the mic. You okay to come to the mic and say yours?
So mine is a very badly drawn.
Closer to the mic.
Mine is a very badly drawn muscle arm. And my statement was, in 3 years, I want to have helped another woman to be or feel safe.
Oh. Anybody else want to throw it into the room? Go for it.
I'm going for it. So this is my little drawing. It's a path, and it has hearts, spades, diamonds, and clubs on it. Yes, I'm a great artist. And then it also has a circle and a triangle, and then the man and woman signal. I don't know if I'm getting it right, somewhere there. So the reason why I chose all of these is I love to play cards, and it just clears my brain to give me space to think. The triangle represents us women, the circle represents us in love, and the male and female together. But more importantly, it's a path that we're all on, and we're all communicating. So those are the little bubbles of communication. And my statement is that everyone understands we are all equal beings.
Ah.
Thank you.
One more, and then we're going to go on to the next piece. Go for it.
So this brilliant piece of artwork is me shouting less, sort of over time, saying less. Right? It's not possible, but it maybe. Really, but with sincerity here, I'm looking forward to see the day that my granddaughter and other granddaughters are truly equal and that they don't have to prove it.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I really long for is that you leave this room and begin to put this vision into action. So in the last inside piece of your booklet, I want you to write what you're going to do. And don't write, change the world. Right? Really try in your mind to parse down what will you do tomorrow morning? What small thing might you do? And then what next small thing might you do? And don't write down 10 because we can't remember those. Well, maybe you can, but I can't anymore. Just write down 3 or 4 that you think you could actually start that will move toward this vision. So take 5 minutes to do that. You know, the thing about spending a lifetime working for something that we all in this room profoundly believe in is so people don't know what I'm laughing at. You know, you put up your hand to come to silence. Lois just went to sleep for a minute and just left her hand up there. I don't know. Are you okay? Okay. Oh, I like that. Hand up for silence and continues to talk. Yeah. You know, the powerful thing I think about working for something that is enormous and systemic, like the issues of gender and racism and homophobia and ableism and all the ways in which people are seen to be different and see themselves to be different in the world. I think when we work in this work, one of the things we have to offer ourselves is forgiveness. Because we don't get to get it right all the time. We don't get to be perfect. And so I'm going to end my session with 2 things. I'm going to read you another poem on forgiveness. I'm going to give away 3 books, 1 on resilience, which is mine, and 2 on Gender Unchained, which is Lorraine Greaves and Nancy Poole. Because I think the ways in which forgiveness plays into this work for me is it's the path to not burn out so that we can begin anew, that every day we get up and think, I will be better in my work for equity than I was yesterday, that there are new opportunities to do things today. Forgiveness is not a blank slate. It does not offer absolution. It does not lighten the burden of past acts. Do not think it is easy, nor is it kind. Rather, it recognizes the power of rising again from the ashes of fires we ourselves have ignited, of dousing the flamethrowers gripped by circumstance and evil. It is a letting go and a holding close. It abides in love and champions knowing, and it walks with a steely, willful force. Forgive me. I want to wrap us up today by thanking in gratitude again the individuals and the organizations who made today possible. Odlin Brown, thank you, thank you, thank you. Soroptimist Foundation of Canada and all those women behind it. The Lobstock Foundation, SFU Faculty of Arts and Social Science, Douglas College, Sandpiper Signs and Decals, the Integrity Group, the BC Federation of Labour, the Minerva Foundation for BC Women, and my team who've let me be here today. What an amazing day. I don't have any original words to end with, so I thought I would just bring us all back in by summarizing what I heard from all the amazing people who shared this stage today. This morning, Sharon opened our day by stretching her hands to hold us as we prepared to dig in and to dig deep. Maureen challenged us to turn over the soil that feeds our society and to fertilize it with love. Benita led by example and held a panel of amazing individuals while they each contributed their own. Sean reminded us of the courage and energy it takes to stay mad and still stay committed. Suzanne put herself fully into the arena with tenacity and vulnerability and taught us that inclusion happens only on purpose. Jill shared her own discomfort and how wrestling with that has reinforced the necessity of using her voice and privilege to lift others. Weil brought practical and tangible tools like pivoting language and having patience and checking our biases that he learned himself through his own lived experience. Julia gave us permission to struggle with how hard it is to speak up and to get comfortable with disequilibrium. Jake equipped us equipped us all and equipped us to help others, particularly men and boys, to be upstanders. And Joan called on us to rise, provoke, forgive, and act. I cannot think of a better day or a better room to have shared it with. Thank you for joining us. Please leave your lanyards at the door, but not what you've learned. And don't forget to take the flowers with you.